Pisces, this reading is about what happens when something that once protected your fire eventually becomes too small to contain the person you've become. And I want to begin by saying that outgrowing something does not automatically mean it was bad. Sometimes a relationship helped you. Sometimes a belief gave you stability. Sometimes a job supported you when you needed it. Sometimes a role, a routine, a family structure, or even a version of yourself held your life together long enough for something inside you to grow. You can appreciate what carried you and still recognize that you've outgrown it. We begin with the Knight of Wands. This is fire, passion, movement, instinct, appetite, courage, and that feeling of wanting to go somewhere before you have completely worked out how you're going to get there. The Knight of Wands is not sitting around making a 12-point plan. He feels the fire and he moves. So when I look at this card as the thing the original container protected, I think it protected your passion. Maybe you had an idea. Maybe you had a dream. Maybe you had a part of yourself that was curious, creative, adventurous, impulsive, or simply hungry for more life. And at one time, the container gave that fire somewhere safe to exist. It may have protected you from moving too quickly. It may have helped you survive. It may have given you enough stability to raise a family, build a career, heal, learn, or simply remain standing during a period when you could not afford to fall apart. The container was not necessarily the enemy. But then we move to the Queen of Pentacles. And this is where the relationship with that container begins to change. The Queen of Pentacles is practical. She wants something she can hold. She wants something she can maintain, nurture, protect, and make real. She wants the bills paid. She wants food in the house. She wants the people she loves cared for. She wants the life around her to function. And there's nothing wrong with that. But look at the difference between the Knight and the Queen. The Knight wants to move through the world. The Queen becomes responsible for holding the world together. Okay, very different energies. And somewhere in that transition, the fire may have stopped being something you followed and became something you used to keep everything else running. The passion became productivity. Your instincts became responsibility. Your energy became something everyone could rely on. The part of you that once wanted to explore became the part that made you the groceries, where it made sure the groceries were bought, the appointments were remembered, the work was completed, the family was okay, and that the structure remained standing. The container became too small when your aliveness was reduced to usefulness. You were still powerful, you were still capable, and you were still creating stability. But the question became, where did the Knight go? Where did that part of you that wanted something simply because it made you feel alive? Where did your appetite go? Where did your curiosity go? Where did the color go? Then we reach the Ten of Pentacles. And this is where the story protecting the old container becomes very clear. The Ten of Pentacles is wealth, family, tradition, inheritance, security, legacy, and the established idea of what a successful life should look like. It's the house. It's the family. It's the money. It's the structure. It's the thing that looks complete from the outside. And I think this is where a great deal of whitewashing can happen. Something can be called security when it has become stagnation. Something may be called loyalty when it's become self-erasure. Endurance may be praised as strength. Silence may be called peace. Adaptation may be mistaken for choice. And money may be used as the final answer to every question. Does it pay? Is it secure? Is it respectable? Will other people understand it? Does it look like the kind of life I was thought to want? The Ten of Pentacles is not a bad card. It can represent something genuinely beautiful. But in this position, it asks whether you have inherited a definition of success that does not fully belong to you. You may have been living from a menu somebody else selected. These are the acceptable careers. These are the acceptable relationship. This is proper timeline. This is what stability looks like. This is what achievement is. This is what a good person should be grateful for. And perhaps you tried to make yourself fit because the structure looks safe, sensible, or successful, but a life can look complete and still leave parts of you outside it. That brings us to the world. The world is completion, integration, fulfillment, and closing of a cycle. But the world is not one and done. You don't reach the world and remain there forever saying, well, I have now learned everything. I have completed being a person. The world closes one cycle so another one can begin. And I think that's essential here. You have integrated something. You have learned from the old structure. You've gathered the stability of the Queen of Pentacles. You understand the Ten of Pentacles. You know what it means to build, maintain, care, provide, and commit. You're not throwing all of that away. You're bringing it with you. But integration is not imprisonment. Completion doesn't mean you have to remain inside the completed cycle. The world says you become large enough to contain more of yourself now. And look at the figure in the center of the card. There's still a wreath around her. There's still a boundary. There's still form. But she can move. The new container is alive. It's flexible. She has room for the whole person inside it. This is not necessarily about destroying every structure in your life. It's about creating a life whose structure fits the person you are now, rather than demanding that you keep shrinking into the person you used to be. Then we end with the Page of Swords. Now, I have a complicated relationship with this little fella. He has ideas, he has questions, he sees something and immediately wants to talk about it. Sometimes he has very little experience, has a tremendous amount of confidence. He can sound as though he has solved the entire universe 15 minutes after discovering there was a problem. He can be a bit of a blowhard. That doesn't make his gift unimportant, though, because after the world, you become the page again, and after completion comes curiosity. After integration comes a new question. After believing you understand the whole story, life hands you another page and says, start here. There is no final point where you know everything. And I say that as a 5. I connected with the Hierophant, the one with the great book of knowledge. The beautiful side of the Hierophant is wisdom, teaching, spiritual understanding, the ability to share what has been learned. The shadow of the Hierophant is the know-it-all standing on a soapbox, correcting everybody else's lived experience because it doesn't match the book. And the Page of Swords carries a smaller version of that same danger. The idea is not proof. A theory is not experience. Confidence does not make something true, but the page also has the courage to question certainty. And that may be how the color begins to return. He questions the box of convention. He questioned the box of money first. He questions the box of inherited success. He questions the box that says the world card means you're finished and should never change it again. He looks at the Ten of Pentacles and asks, who decided this was the only definition of a good life? Who decided that security must cost me my fire? Who decided gratitude means I can never want more? Who's decided because something carried me once, I must live inside it forever? The page doesn't need to have every answer yet. His role is to reopen the question. Sometimes the first sign that you have outgrown a life is not certainty about what comes next. It's the moment you finally allow yourself to question what already exists. And that is uncomfortable because certain feels safe. Even an unhappy certainty can feel safer than an unknown possibility. You know how to function inside the old structure. You know what's expected, who you're supposed to be. And the page interrupts that. He brings back the unfinished thought, the inconvenient question, the idea that sounds slightly impractical, the curiosity you keep trying to dismiss. And this takes us back to the Knight of Wands. The fire didn't disappear. It moved underground. It waited beneath the responsibilities, the maintenance, the inherited expectations, and the polished explanation of why you should be satisfied. Now it's returning through curiosity. The Knight says, I want to move. The page says, what if there's another way? The Queen says, can we make it real? The 10 asks, what are we inheriting and what are we passing forward? The World says, the cycle has given you everything it can. And then the page lifts the sword and begins again. So perhaps this is not about recklessly abandoning your life. It may be about telling the truth about where that life no longer fits. You can honor the Queen of Pentacles without forcing her to carry everything forever. You can appreciate the Ten of Pentacles without making wealth or approval the measure of your soul. You can celebrate the world without treating completion like a prison. And you can listen to the page without pretending every new idea is already a finished plan. There's humility in becoming the beginner again. There's also freedom. You don't need to know exactly what the next world will look like. You only need enough honesty to recognize that the old one has become too small. The container first protected your fire. Then your fire became responsible for maintaining the container. The inherited story called that security. The world completed the lesson, and now the page is asking the question that restores the color. What becomes possible when you stop treating somebody else's certainty as the boundary of your life? Pisces, you're allowed to become curious again. You're allowed to revise the plan. You're allowed to appreciate what carried you without promising to remain inside it. You're allowed to begin after completion. Okay, you're allowed to discover what the life waiting beyond the old container does not erase everything else you built. It just may finally give you that fire somewhere large enough to live in. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget that I have an original channel called Everything Pisces. So check that out. It's got the same logo. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you next Monday. Bye for now.